I can't stand it anymore. She's just a parasite, clinging on and lecturing us like she's better than everyone. I can't wait to finally live with Samantha. Just a bit longer. Once you graduate high school, Sarah won't be needed anymore. I'm counting the days. That's what my husband, Robert, and his son, Andrew, said, sneering at me. All those years I spent trying to support them, and this is what I get. But if that's how they want to play it, I won't hold back either. I'm leaving, and they'll see just how lost they are without me. Oh, what's wrong? I'm just a burden, aren't I? Some freeloading nuisance, right? So I figured you'd be happier if I left. Deep down, I know they can't function without me. All these years, they've relied on me for everything. They won't make it without my support, and they have no idea what's coming. My name is Sarah, and I'm 35. I work at a decent-sized company. I used to be in the sales department, a role that kept me on my toes, with non-stop projects and client meetings. But now I'm in a more relaxed position. In fact, some might even say it's a dead-end job, with not much to do. But it's not like I was demoted or anything. I asked for this. The reason? My marriage to Robert. He's 42, a little older than me, and we first met at work. Back then, he was my boss in the sales department. When I joined the company fresh out of college, he was already married. So, in those early days, I never really thought of him as anything more than my supervisor. Everything changed 9 years ago when Robert got divorced. The separation took a toll on him, and I could see the stress weighing him down each day. Being a single dad only made it harder, especially with a young son, Andrew, to take care of, though he had some help from his family. Raising a kid alone was no walk in the park. I guess I relied too much on my ex-wife. That's why she left me, because I leaned on her way too much. Even as he gave that self-deprecating laugh, Robert was always giving his best at work. Seeing him like that, I wanted to help, so I decided to support him in any way I could at work. But no matter what I did, his expression never really brightened up. I didn't have much experience dealing with men, so I didn't know what to do in situations like this. So I decided that, at the very least, I could help him release some of his stress. And I began to join him for meals after work. Maybe it was spending that time together. Or maybe my feelings had always been there, and I just hadn't realized it. Before I knew it, I had started to develop romantic feelings for him, and it seemed like he felt the same way about me. While I was passive and unsure of what to do, Robert was the one who took the initiative and made his interest known. Thank you for always thinking about me and supporting me. If it's all right with you, could you continue being by my side? In the end, those were the words of his proposal, and I decided to marry Robert. But even then, I was constantly worried about his son, Andrew, who was 10 years old at the time. I had met him several times before the wedding, but we hadn't really gotten close. Robert meant a lot to me, but I didn't want to marry him in a way that would disregard Andrew's feelings. So I frequently talked to Robert about it and arranged outings with Andrew. Maybe my sincerity reached him. I'm sorry for everything. I was scared that if Dad remarried you, our memories together would just disappear. On the way back from one of our outings, Andrew spoke, his face downturned, like he was embarrassed. But that's not true, right? So, if it's okay with you, would you be my other mom? Those words broke through my uncertainty. And Robert and I were finally married. That was 7 years ago. It was around then that I moved to my current department. I wanted to have more flexibility to spend time with Andrew, who had become my son. Both Robert and Andrew were happy about my decision. Looking back, that first year of marriage was undoubtedly happy. At least, that's how I felt. But little by little, things began to change. It all started with a suggestion from Robert. Sarah, could you quit your job? Why? With Andrew's school fees and everything coming up, I think it's better if I keep working. Well, my salary did go up a bit, right? So I think it might be better if you focused on managing the household for the future. To be honest, Robert's argument wasn't very convincing. We had been a dual-income family for a year, and there hadn't been any issues, so I figured there was no need to change anything. I mean, I had already switched to a less demanding role at work to balance things out. But then again, Andrew was entering a sensitive time in his life. Maybe having both parents away at work wouldn't be good for him. I thought maybe Robert was considering all this and trying to plan ahead. So, although I had my doubts, I decided to respect Robert's wishes and quit my job. All right, but can I at least take on a part-time job? Yay, sure, but make sure you take care of things at home. All right, of course, I won't cut any corners. I'll work even harder than before. That conversation changed our lives. And in some ways, the timing was perfect. It was around then that Andrew started to grow distant and cold toward me. What's wrong? You got home late today. Whatever. It's none of your business. Just let me hang out if I want to. At first, it was just a little pushback to my questions about why he came home late from school. But soon, Andrew started to respond coldly whenever I spoke to him, and his irritation became more obvious. I tried talking to Robert about it, but his response was dismissive and uninterested. That's just how kids are at that age. Don't take it too seriously, but you're the one handling things at home, so, in the end, you've got to figure it out, Sarah. But we're a family. Can't you help me out too? What? Are you kidding? Don't make things complicated for me. That's why you're at home, so handle it, okay? No matter how many times I tried to talk to him, Robert just wouldn't take me seriously. Meanwhile, Andrew continued to grow, entering middle school and then high school, and with each passing year, his attitude toward me only got worse. It would have been one thing if Andrew's harsh words were the worst of it, but sometimes he would go so far as to throw away the food I had cooked for him, right in front of me. Andrew, did something happen? Or did I do something wrong? If there's an issue, I'd often tell him to talk to me, let me know so I could make things better. I even reached out to his school once, but nothing ever came of it. No clear reason for his behavior. His attitude was so terrible, it made it hard to believe he had once accepted my marriage to his father. The problem is you. You act like a mom when you didn't even give birth to me. Just get out of our house. What? You can't leave anyway, can you? Since you're just living off my dad like a leech. You're really hopeless. I was left stunned by his brutal words, and Andrew would just keep piling on the insults. This wasn't an isolated incident. It happened again and again. Sure, Andrew was a teenager, going through a rough and emotional stage of life. And yes, I wasn't his biological mother. But had I really done anything to deserve such awful treatment, or was it that I had done nothing at all? And that was the problem. With that sense of powerlessness weighing on me, I threw myself into my chores, my part-time job, saving money, anything I could do. If it could make Andrew's and Robert's lives a little more comfortable, then that's all that mattered. But my efforts only seemed to be in vain. Andrew's attitude never improved. In fact, it worsened. And to make things worse, even Robert started to complain. Lately, you've been slacking off on housework, haven't you? That's not true. I've always been giving it my all. Giving it your all. People who say that are usually the ones who aren't doing anything. The food is terrible, your makeup is sloppy, and you're failing as both a wife and a woman, Sarah. And to top it off, more hurtful things started happening to me. Oh, Andrew, thanks. It's a nice tie. It's nothing, really. Every year on Father's Day, Andrew would give Robert a little gift, even with all the issues. There was clearly love between the father and son. But on Mother's Day, which came every year as well, Andrew hardly ever gave me anything. The only exception was the year we got married. Well, Mom's looking at us like she's expecting something. Huh, I don't see it. Did I don't see it mean he didn't see that look on my face? Or that he didn't see me as a mother at all? Were we even a family? At some point, I started asking myself that question. Still, I kept the marriage going, kept trying to hold the family together. Maybe because I was afraid that if Robert and Andrew abandoned me, it would prove that I was unworthy of anyone's love. I had so little experience in love that I started to half believe that idea. It was in that state of mind that we reached our 7th year of marriage. On a particular Sunday, I had a part-time job that morning, so I quietly got ready and left the house, trying not to wake my family. Since I'd been working there for a long time, the other part-time workers and the manager were all kind to me. They treat me well, so I'm just giving back the same kindness. That's what everyone would say. But why didn't that same logic apply to my family? I couldn't help but wonder about that as I continued to work. But maybe, somewhere along the way, the weight of those days started to take its toll on me. That day, my exhaustion must have been written all over my face because everyone around me seemed so concerned. Eventually, the manager told me to take the rest of the day off, so I gratefully headed home. It was a day off, so maybe they were still sleeping. When I got to the house, I quietly opened the door and tried not to make any noise as I went to my room. That's when I overheard it, Robert and Andrew's conversation from the living room. How long are we going to keep living with that woman? I get it, but hold on just a little longer. Yay, I know, she's getting on my nerves too. They were obviously talking about me. I instinctively knew that and decided to listen quietly. Robert and Andrew didn't realize I was home, so they kept on talking without restraint. I mean, isn't it easy though? She does the laundry and cooks without being asked. Sure, but she nags about everything else. It's a pain. Yay, I get it. But she'll eventually give in. Give in. What did that mean? Just as I was wondering, they revealed the answer so easily. If she asks for a divorce, it'll make things easier for everyone. That's why we've been constantly complaining. It's been a good way to vent and, well, kill two birds with one stone. I'm serious. You know, Dad told me to suck it up and get used to her at first, but I hated it. And now, as I get older, I can't stand her even more. With those words, I finally understood the full picture. I was never seen as more than a convenient housekeeper, expected to shoulder the burden of all the chores. This marriage had been a way to push all the troublesome responsibilities onto me. For both of them, I was just someone to take on the stress they couldn't place on their parents or grandparents. Even as I stood there, stunned, the two of them continued their selfish conversation. But what if that woman had given up early? What would you have done then? I would have dragged it out somehow. It's not like she can do anything but rely on me, so it would have been fine. Yay, that makes sense. Though I couldn't clearly see their faces from where I was hiding, I could imagine exactly what kind of smirks they wore. That's how it had been for the past 7 years. And now I truly understood. Something inside me shattered. But really, isn't it annoying? She's just a parasite who can't survive without us, always lecturing. I can't wait to start living with Samantha. Just hold on a little longer. Once you graduate high school, she'll be out of our lives for good. I can't wait for that day to come. It was clear that Robert and Andrew intended to cut me off entirely. The moment that realization hit me, any love I had for the two of them completely crumbled. What had I been doing all this time, going out of my way to care for them? Why had I been so scared of losing their love? The more I thought about it, the less I understood. But one thing was certain. I no longer needed to endure anything for these two. With that thought, my emotions calmed as if I had never felt any turmoil. I left the house, resolved. I went straight to a detective agency located in a corner of the city. I had thought about going there before, but I always hesitated. This time, I didn't. Hearing the woman's name in their conversation, combined with the situation, made me certain that Robert was cheating. I hired the detective agency to investigate Robert's activities. It would take some time for the results to come back. So until then, I decided to carry on as usual. Hurry up and get my gym clothes ready. You're really useless, you know that? Oh, I'm sorry about that. Hey, dinner looks the same as always. Can't you be more creative? I see. I'll look up some new recipes. Maybe it was because I had made up my mind on what needed to be done. During that waiting period, their behavior and harsh words didn't bother me much at all. In fact, the way they were so oblivious to my plans was almost comical, and I had to stop myself from smiling. Still, I couldn't afford to let my thoughts show, so I made sure to act as normal as possible, day in and day out. About a month went by, and then the results of the investigation finally arrived. Sure enough, Robert was cheating, and not only had the affair been going on for a long time, but Andrew knew about it. Just as I suspected, I was completely disgusted, not just with them, but with myself too, for ever considering these two as my family. But all of that was now over. During the waiting period, their constant cruel behavior had wiped away any lingering attachment I had for them. And so, one Sunday, I quietly left the house. I went straight to my parents' home. I had already explained the situation to them in advance. Enraged by their betrayal, my parents welcomed me with open arms. Luckily, their house wasn't far from my workplace, so I could still continue my part-time job without any major changes. My workplace gladly approved my transportation allowance, so I was able to carry on as usual. Meanwhile, Robert and Andrew didn't contact me for the first 3 days. I was sure they were taking my leaving lightly, probably laughing it off. That changed around the 4th day after I left. Little by little, my phone started filling up with missed calls and messages. At first, it was only 1 or 2 calls every half day, but within a week, they totaled over 100, a clear sign of their growing desperation. And why wouldn't they be? For 7 years, I had handled nearly all the household chores and finances. Those two, who hardly ever lifted a finger to help, probably had no idea where anything was. They likely didn't know where the seasonal clothes were kept, where the kitchen tools were stored, or even how to use the washing machine. In other words, they were stuck in a life where they couldn't handle even basic chores like cooking or doing laundry. Of course, just because I wasn't there didn't mean they could skip school or work. I couldn't help but laugh as I imagined what their lives must be like now. Clearly, they were starting to run out of options. They even reached out to my parents, asking if they knew where I was, as if that wouldn't lead to questions about why I left and the way they had been treating me. Of course, my parents pretended not to know anything. By the way, neither Robert nor Andrew ever came by my workplace at the supermarket. They never showed any interest in my job, so they didn't even know where I worked. They were completely out of options. Then, on a Saturday, a month after I left the house, I decided it was time to finally answer one of Robert's calls. "Hello. So, how's life without me? Getting used to it yet? Where the hell are you? Get back here right now." It had been a while since I'd heard Robert's voice, and it was completely frantic. He was clearly panicking, his voice trembling with desperation. Just hearing that tone makes leaving worth it. "Stop messing around. Get back here, now. Huh, aren't I just a useless freeloader? I thought you'd be better off without me." I could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other side of the line. You know what? I mean, it's not like you both haven't been belittling me all this time. Isn't housework supposed to be easy for you? Well, it's not." From the hesitation in Robert's voice, I could only imagine the state of the house right now. Almost skipping with joy, I said to him, "Want me to guess? The place is a mess, right? You probably don't even know how to sort the trash, so the house is practically overflowing with garbage. And since you can't do laundry, it must be smelling pretty bad by now." "Yay, that's right." He admitted it more easily than I expected. He must have been completely at his wit's end. "And what about money? Bet you're wasting it all on takeout and delivery, and you're about to dip into the savings, huh?" It must have been exactly as I described. All Robert could do was let out a groan. "Oh, how unfortunate. It would be nice if some woman could help you out, right? Though I guess that woman isn't much help anyway." "So you do know." "Know about what?" "Sorry, I'm not smart enough to figure it out." My evasive answers must have infuriated him. Or maybe he had finally reached his breaking point. Robert, unable to contain himself, begged me in a voice that was almost a scream. "Hey, please. Enough already. Come back home. We can't survive without you. Yay, please help us, Mom. It seemed like Andrew was nearby, listening to the conversation. He sounded as desperate as his father, pleading frantically. It's not the same without you. Please, come back. If I'd heard those words a few months ago, I would have been over the moon. But the person I was now was no longer afraid of losing the illusion of family that had once haunted me. Seizing the chance to repay them for all the mocking and insults, I responded with as much sarcasm as I could muster. What? I'm just a parasite who's in the way. Right? I thought you'd be better off with me gone. No, it's not like that. I was just going through a rebellious phase, and I didn't really mean what I said. His attempt to excuse himself with just going through a phase sounded jumbled and disjointed. The shame of having to beg the very person he had constantly insulted must have been eating away at him. And though part of me felt a small sense of satisfaction, I wasn't done yet. Oh really? You both seem to be reflecting on things. Should we have a talk, then? With those words, I arranged to meet Robert and Andrew at my parents' house the following Sunday. Well, you two look awful. The next day, around noon, Robert and Andrew sat in the living room. Their clothes were wrinkled and smelled faintly of sweat. It was obvious they hadn't been doing their laundry properly. They probably didn't even know there was a laundromat nearby. The expressions on both their faces were terrible. Whether from lack of sleep or exhaustion, they looked slightly pale. Though it was just us in the living room, my parents were waiting in the room next door. I'd thought about having them join the conversation, but for now, I wanted to talk to Robert and Andrew alone. Shut up. Is this enough for you? Can you come back now? Yay, you're a grown woman. So stop sulking and come home. Since they knew my parents were nearby, they couldn't afford to raise their voices, but their tone suggested they felt more confident now that I'd agreed to talk, sounding a little more assertive than they had on the phone. All I did was smile back at them. Hold on just a minute. There's one more person. Looks like they're here. Just as I was about to say there was one more person involved, the doorbell rang. I walked to the entrance and came back to the living room with the person in question. The moment they saw who I had brought, Robert and Andrew's faces twisted in shock. Samantha. What is Samantha doing here? The woman I brought with me was about 10 years younger than me, and she looked visibly uncomfortable. Her name was Samantha, and though it didn't need to be said, she was Robert's mistress. The investigation had revealed her address, name, and many other details. So I reached out to her and arranged for her to come today. Why, you ask? Obviously, because I invited her. She's directly involved in, well, what happens to us from now on. So you did know, after all. I never said I didn't know, did I? And now that things have come to this, you can probably guess what I'm about to say. Right? He was visibly flustered, unable to utter anything coherent. I smiled broadly as I addressed Robert and Andrew. Robert, we're getting a divorce. And Andrew, that means my time as your stepmother is over. Robert's mouth opened and closed like a goldfish, clearly still in shock. Since he was so off balance, I decided to take advantage and continue. Just so you know, I have all the evidence I need. So there's no point in trying to talk your way out of this. And considering how we're getting divorced, you can bet you'll be paying what you owe. Wait, are you saying you're going to demand compensation? Of course. Why wouldn't I? We're getting divorced because of your affair, after all. Technically, it wasn't just the affair. It was also the cumulative disrespect they showed me. But there was no need to go into those details. Still, there was one more thing I needed to say. And of course, Samantha, you'll be taking responsibility too. What? You've got to be kidding me. Why do I have to take responsibility? Isn't it obvious? You were part of the affair, and it's been going on for 7 years, even before and after Robert and I got married. I didn't learn that from the detective agency. I found that out by looking through Robert's room and his smartphone. Since Robert had asked me to be a housewife, except for my part-time job, I had plenty of time and opportunities to investigate. And since Robert thought so little of me, he was completely careless, making it easy to gather evidence. Samantha worked at a nightclub Robert used to frequent with his colleagues. Judging from the oldest photo I found, Robert had met Samantha around the time he started dating me. I don't know what was going through his mind back then, but considering he married me as a convenient housekeeper, it's likely that Samantha was his true love all along. He even introduced her to Andrew multiple times, so there was no doubt. While I managed the house, Robert was enjoying his freedom and romance. Then why didn't he just marry Samantha from the start? It's likely that Samantha herself refused. Why didn't you marry Robert? Huh? Because marriage is such a hassle. You of all people should know that. Her blunt response surprised me a bit, but she wasn't wrong. At the very least, it was an undeniable fact that my marriage to Robert had turned into quite a hassle. At Samantha's words, Robert panicked and hurriedly interjected, "Wait a minute. Samantha, didn't you say it was too soon to get married? Isn't that what we agreed on? Yay, you said you'd become my new mom." Andrew casually said something outrageous. Sure, if she ended up marrying Robert, she'd automatically become his mother, but it was still a creepy thing to say. Then again, given that he was the son of a man who'd been cheating for 7 years, it made sense. While I recoiled internally, Samantha snapped back at Robert and Andrew. "What? Are you kidding me? That's disgusting. Why would I ever become your wife or mother just because you expect me to take responsibility?" Andrew's face twisted in disbelief as she flatly called them disgusting. Ignoring Andrew's shock, Samantha continued, "I only kept you in the running as a candidate because you spent money on me. But now that it's come to this, I'm done, I'm out." After spitting those words at Robert and Andrew, Samantha turned to face me. "Don't expect me to take any responsibility. You can go ahead and have your little family talk." With that, she stormed out of the house. I had no intention of chasing after her. I already knew where she lived and had all the information I needed. Now my focus was back on the 2 fools who were left behind. "Oh dear, looks like your new family member just walked out on you. But don't worry, that has no bearing on the divorce or compensation." "Wait, hold on." Robert, who had been staring after her along with Andrew, snapped back to reality at my words and turned to me with a forced smile. Sarah, can't we just give this another shot?" "What?" Despite my ice-cold response, Robert kept that strained, fake smile plastered on his face. "Yes, we came here today to make up with you, Sarah. Isn't that right?" "Yay, exactly." Andrew wore the same forced smile as Robert, turning it toward me. As I stood there disgusted by their creepy, identical grins, Robert took my silence as an opportunity to continue speaking. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about Samantha too. I was planning on apologizing for everything and becoming a real family again." "Yeah, that's right. We realized how awful we were. And this past month without you, Mom, has shown us just how much you did for us." Their words were blatantly obvious lies, desperate attempts to salvage the situation. They were completely oblivious to my disgust and likely assumed their phony apologies were convincing. Finishing off their string of lies, they offered a deep, insincere apology. "In the end, the one I truly love is you, Sarah. Please, come back to us. Please, Mom." Even as I looked at their faces, there wasn't a trace of feeling left in me. This family had fallen apart long ago. I had known it all along. Still, I decided to ask them one last question. "Both of you, look at me. What is it?" At my words, spoken with a smile, hope lit up on their faces, as if they had found a lifeline. But I didn't drop my smile as I asked. "Just one question. If we were to go back home together now, who would clean the house?" That question made both of their faces freeze instantly. They were probably about to ask me to do it, but then realized how bad that would sound. Or perhaps they were thinking of suggesting that we clean together as a family, only to hesitate, unsure of the right answer. Either way, the fact that they couldn't answer right away made it clear they had not reflected on anything. Even if you were lying, you could have just said you'd handle all the cleaning yourselves. Well, I get it now. There's no chance of reconciliation. I'm going to divorce you. Any objections? Get a grip, Sarah. It's my income that's been supporting us. You wouldn't survive without me. Yay, you can't make it without being a leech. They must have realized they couldn't afford to keep up appearances any longer. Both of them dropped their pretenses and tried to tie me down with their unfiltered, true feelings. But they were both making a huge mistake. Too bad. You two might be struggling without me, but I'm perfectly fine without you. Actually, I've been offered a position as a candidate for store manager at the supermarket. What? With years of trust and effort built up, the store manager had recommended me for a promotion. Though I'd been hesitant at first, this whole ordeal pushed me to apply for the role, and I passed the interview to become a manager in training. I hadn't yet decided on housing, but if necessary, there were employee dorms available, so I wasn't worried. So you too, best of luck. There was no lie in those words. It was a genuine message of encouragement from me. Of course, I doubted things would go well for them, though. I wasn't sure if they understood what I truly felt. But it was clear they had realized there was nothing more they could do. Realizing there was nothing left to say, they both slumped their shoulders and quietly left my parents' house. My parents, who had been silently supporting me from the next room, were relieved and overjoyed that the conversation had ended with my victory. I'd caused them so much worry, and I made a mental note to properly thank them later. For now, we decided to finalize the details another day, bringing this chapter to a close. And then, a month later, Robert and I were officially divorced. The delay was caused by Robert's resistance. Fine, divorce is unavoidable, but you still have to pay child support. That was his argument, but it didn't hold up. After all, I had never formally adopted Andrew. When we married, I'd offered to adopt him, but Robert himself had rejected the idea. So in this case, I had no legal obligation to support him. Perhaps he had planned to remarry Samantha and wanted to avoid any complications. In the end, not being able to claim child support from me was entirely his own doing. As for the distribution of property, Robert's parents got involved, ensuring that I wasn't disadvantaged in any way. According to them, it was their way of apologizing for the trouble Robert had caused. And of course, I received compensation for the affair. To pay the compensation, Robert ended up using most of the money he received from the distribution of property. As a result, Andrew's college fund was wiped out, forcing him to give up on going to college. Furious, Andrew got into a huge fight with Robert. Robert was injured during the altercation and had to take time off work, and during his absence, word of our divorce spread throughout the company. Well, I was the one who spread it. When my former colleagues asked, I told them the truth, and it spread like wildfire. Robert, who was always so prideful, probably wouldn't be able to handle the gossip and would end up leaving the company on his own. And as for Andrew, he had to work day and night to cover Robert's medical expenses and his own living costs. Though Robert's parents could have helped, they chose to stand by and watch. They said it was better for Andrew to be straightened out now. They said it would be best for him to get his act together while he still could. As for Samantha, she tried to act like nothing was wrong and continued on with her life. But when I visited her parents and exposed everything, they were furious. She ended up being disowned by her own family. She tried to rely on other men she was involved with besides Robert, but they grew suspicious, questioned her, and she had no choice but to confess. As a result, all those men cut ties with her. The rumors spread even further, and she couldn't continue working at the club. She eventually disappeared without a trace. There were whispers that some of the men, enraged, were hunting her down, but who knows if that's true. As for me, I'm just glad I could expose the truth to her parents. The rest is no longer my concern. Now I'm living each day as a store manager candidate, learning all that I can. There's a lot to absorb, but I find it fulfilling. The 7 years I spent with Robert and Andrew were filled with hardship, but they weren't wasted. I used to focus only on my family, Robert and Andrew, but I realized that I was always watched over and loved by others as well. To prove that realization right, I've decided to live without being bound by past sufferings and pursue true happiness.
This is the work of someone with a low level of education. It's no better than garbage. Elizabeth shouted loudly while sneering at my documents. Because of her, I had worked overtime and desperately put this together, yet this was her attitude. It was truly unbelievable. As I furrowed my brow, the bootlicker, Marshall, sided with Elizabeth. She's always causing trouble, isn't she? Maybe she should start over from elementary school? Even my kid could write a report like this. With those words, Elizabeth tossed the pages of the report one by one into the air. No, more like kindergarten. But I guess it's too late for that. Marshall looked me up and down, laughing in a condescending manner. I don't want to work with these kinds of people anymore. I quit. Your feelings have been made perfectly clear. Huh? The moment I bowed my head and left the office, the faces of all the employees turned pale. I won't put up with this anymore. I'll make Elizabeth and Marshall regret this for sure. I'm Virginia Sanders. I turned 45 this year. I work as a tax accountant at Abrupt CPA firm. At this firm, we have a wide range of clients, from companies with annual revenues exceeding $10 million to small and medium-sized businesses with just a handful of employees. I originally worked in a different industry. I worked in customer service at a mid-sized cosmetics manufacturer. Then one day, I was transferred to the accounting department, and that's where I discovered my passion for accounting. Accounting work has great depth. You look at receipts and bank statements and journalize the accounting data, but even for similar products, the journalizing changes depending on the amount. Tax laws are also involved, so studying is essential. I was also independently studying to become a certified public tax accountant. However, the CPTA exam is extremely difficult. Given that only a few pass, even if you study, it's actually not easy to pass. Plus, it's tough to study after work. But somehow, I managed to study a little bit each day, and after several years, I passed the CPTA exam. To gain practical experience, I decided to change jobs and join Abrupt CPA firm. As one of the leading CPA firms in the country, Abrupt CPA firm has many new graduates joining. Most of them pass the required exams while in college and then enter our firm. So there were many people working as CPTAs in their 20s. And here I am, already in my 40s. When I first joined, I didn't have enough practical experience, so even though I passed the exams, I couldn't even register as a CPTA. Also, accounting and CPA work are completely different. In accounting, it was enough to just do the journalizing, but as a CPTA, you also need to prepare financial statements and various filings. Each one has strict submission deadlines, and mistakes are not tolerated. So I felt nervous with each and every task. There were many things I didn't understand, and I had to ask my colleagues who were more than 10 years younger than me questions over and over. Because of that, I was often treated coldly, but I somehow managed to catch up. And now, I'm registered as a CPTA and the number of clients I'm in charge of has increased. However, it hasn't been all smooth sailing. In the past, I made a big mistake that almost crushed my spirit. The person who helped me during that time was the director, Mrs. Henderson. Mrs. Henderson is 7 years older than me and a veteran with 30 years of experience in this field. She's also well-versed in tax law changes, and many colleagues rely on her. Thanks to Mrs. Henderson's support, I've been able to keep going. I'll continue to do my best under Mrs. Henderson. With that thought, I threw myself into work again today. But that determination of mine was cruelly shattered. Our firm gets incredibly busy from March to May. So every year around summer, personnel changes are made, and this time, it was decided that Mrs. Henderson would be transferred. I'm going to be launching a new branch office. I'll be the branch manager there, Mrs. Henderson told the other members and I. I currently belong to the Corporate Tax Division too. We mainly handle small and medium-sized business clients. Being a branch manager is a promotion at our firm. So while it's disheartening to lose Mrs. Henderson, all I can do is support her. Congratulations, Mrs. Henderson. When I said that, Mrs. Henderson smiled gently and told me, "Thank you." The new director will be Mrs. Elizabeth Alexander from the Corporate Tax Division 1. She's close to you in age, so I'm sure you two will get along well. Yes. The Corporate Tax Division 1 mainly handles large corporations and international companies. Mrs. Henderson was originally from the Corporate Tax Division 1 as well. Since it's on a different floor, we only have a chance to meet at the Christmas party. And at the Christmas party, we sit at different tables, so we didn't really get to know each other well. I've also heard rumors that the Corporate Tax Division 1 is made up of elites from prestigious universities. A new director coming from that department. I was feeling a bit anxious about what kind of person would be coming. And then, on the day the new director took office. Starting today, I will be the director of the Corporate Tax Division 2, Elizabeth Alexander. Until now, I was in the Corporate Tax Division 1, surrounded by highly competent individuals. I've heard that the Corporate Tax Division 2 is a gathering of failures. I will swiftly eliminate any useless personnel, so be prepared. Elizabeth made an outrageous statement right from the start. Naturally, my colleagues in the Corporate Tax Division 2 were abuzz. And my colleagues also began introducing themselves to Elizabeth one by one. Among them were some who had transferred from the Corporate Tax Division 1 along with Elizabeth. I'm Marshall Carter. I've been assisting Mrs. Alexander until now, so I was transferred along with her this time. He was still young at 38 years old. He had a refreshing and handsome appearance that seemed like it would be well received by female clients. When Marshall made his introduction, Elizabeth said with a smile, "Mr. Carter mainly serves as my assistant. Just because he's capable, don't think about asking him for help." With those words, she kept our colleagues in check. Marshall also made a face that showed he didn't entirely mind. From Marshall's demeanor, I realized it would be best not to get too involved with him. Now, for the next introduction. Oh? Elizabeth looked at me standing next to Marshall and tilted her head. Is something the matter? Elizabeth kept making strange faces, so I couldn't help but ask. Then Elizabeth laughed in a troubled way and said, "You're close to me in age, right? And yet you're just a regular employee. I was wondering how incompetent you must be." What? I was baffled by Elizabeth's exceedingly rude remark. My colleagues around me also kept their heads down, glancing at Elizabeth and me. Feeling uncomfortable, I somehow managed to squeeze out my words. I changed jobs and came here. So I haven't been with the company for very long. Well, whatever. If you're useless, I'll just fire you. Right, Mr. Carter? Elizabeth said that and talked to Marshall. There's nothing Mrs. Alexander can't do. Firing an old woman like this would be a piece of cake for her. Marshall responded happily to Elizabeth's question. I could only watch their exchange in silence. From then on, my work environment only got worse. As Elizabeth's assistant, Marshall checks the department's proposals, but he's especially hard on me. Mrs. Sanders. Don't submit such a basic tax-saving idea that anyone could come up with. Please propose something that would reduce taxes by over $10,000. You're embarrassing the abrupt CPA firm name. Saying that, he let out a big sigh and tossed the documents onto the desk. Even if you say that. I was puzzled by Marshall's comment. Because the tax-saving plan I proposed is a method recommended by our accounting firm. Tax-saving measures need to be done according to tax laws. Marshall should know that, yet he was making unreasonable demands. Anyway, I can't pass a proposal like this on to Mrs. Alexander. Here, redo it. After that, he acted as if his work was done and wouldn't even make eye contact with me. However, when another young female colleague brought a proposal, his attitude changed instantly. This is fantastic, isn't it? It's so different from someone's proposal. Let's send it to Mrs. Alexander for review right away. This female colleague always proposes the same tax-saving measures, so it should be the same content this time too. Still, Marshall showered her with praise every time. In the end, Marshall probably judges based only on the other person's youth and cuteness, not the content of the proposal. Elizabeth is much the same. She looks down on me just because I'm close to her in age. Even today, when I brought her a tax return to review, it was awful. Please take a look at this. The moment I said that, Elizabeth's face contorted. Is there a problem? Worried about Elizabeth's attitude, I asked, and Elizabeth let out a big sigh. What's with this paperclip? It's attached at an angle. What? I was baffled by Elizabeth's comment. Because that was something Marshall had pointed out. When Marshall checked the tax return earlier. Could you attach the paperclip at an angle? That's the rule when submitting to Mrs. Alexander, he said. Glancing at Marshall, I saw him giving me a mean smirk. Marshall had probably set it up so I would get scolded on purpose. That's what Mr. Carter said earlier. I tried to explain the reason, but the moment I mentioned Marshall's name, Elizabeth got angry. Don't make excuses, just reattach it straight. You really have no common sense. Elizabeth complained as she said that. After that, Elizabeth went on and on about how incompetent I was. My colleagues watched Elizabeth and me as if hiding. Mrs. Sanders is getting yelled at again. They were laughing as they said that. It made me feel truly miserable. After that, I had no choice but to endure Elizabeth's scolding. Then one day, Elizabeth placed several files in front of me. What are these? Though perplexed, I asked Elizabeth. Then Elizabeth laughed through her nose and said, These are files for clients with proposal appointments scheduled at the end of this month. I'm giving you work. Make proposals for all of them. I was stunned by Elizabeth's words. Lately, Elizabeth and Marshall have been pushing their work onto me for various reasons. At first, it was data entry and preparing tax returns. Gradually, it turned into researching answers to questions from clients, checking tax returns prepared by other colleagues, and being saddled with most of Elizabeth and the others' work. Because of that, my overtime hours kept increasing. My colleagues look at me and laugh. They probably find it amusing that Elizabeth and Marshall's attacks are focused solely on me. Poor thing, there's no way she can handle that much. My colleagues looked down on me with contempt. They watched me as if it were someone else's problem and laughed. Ignoring those colleagues, I looked at Elizabeth. Proposals for all of these? And if it's the end of this month, that only leaves 1 week, right? I asked Elizabeth in a panic. If it were my own clients, I could prepare a proposal in about a day per company. But this time, they were all Elizabeth's clients. Just understanding each company's situation would take at least 2 days. Plus, my job isn't limited to just making proposals. It ranges from daily bookkeeping and preparing tax returns for clients to responding to their questions. There was no way I could accept Elizabeth's instructions. Then, Elizabeth said something outrageous. "If you don't have enough time, just work overtime again. You're always working overtime to earn extra pay anyway. You're so stupid. I'm graciously letting you help, so be grateful. Who does she think is responsible for my increased overtime?" That what I thought, but she is my boss. I bit my lip and endured it. And Marshall, who was next to Elizabeth, said something similar. "You're usually just a nuisance in the corporate tax division too. Can't you at least try to be useful?" Blamed by both Elizabeth and Marshall, my spirit finally broke. I understand. And so, I ended up having to prepare proposals for Elizabeth's clients. However, this was quite a challenge. When I opened the accounting data, I was appalled. There's not a single entry for this period. I hurriedly checked the client's filing cabinet, and there I found untouched accounting documents. Copies of bank statements and receipts were still in envelopes. I can't prepare the materials unless I enter all of these. Normally, when creating a proposal, you first enter all the accounting documents received from the client. This is to calculate the current profit and estimate the profit until the end of the period. I quickly checked the accounting data of the other clients Elizabeth pushed onto me, but none of them had been processed at all. What in the world had Elizabeth been doing this whole time? I might not finish even if I work overtime. My face turned pale as I muttered unintentionally. But I couldn't give up. After that, I worked frantically. I quickly took care of my own work and then made proposals for Elizabeth's clients. During lunch breaks, I worked while eating in an assembly line fashion. My colleagues saw me like that but didn't offer to help. Even if you work that hard, you won't make it in time. Mrs. Sanders should just give up and go crying to Mrs. Alexander, they said, laughing. No matter how hard I tried, there wasn't enough time, and because of overtime, I kept missing the last bus each day. The taxi fares have already added up to an insane amount, but it's all coming out of my own pocket. Good work. As I worked overtime on Elizabeth's proposals, Elizabeth and Marshall went home at the usual time as if it were only natural. And so, I managed to finish the proposals for Elizabeth's clients by the deadline. Please review these. Since they were Elizabeth's clients this time, I asked Elizabeth directly to review them. I was utterly exhausted both mentally and physically. Today, I thought I would go home right after regular hours and get a good night's sleep. However, upon looking at the proposals I had painstakingly prepared, Elizabeth said something outrageous the next moment. "This is the work of someone with a low level of education. It's no better than garbage." Elizabeth shouted loudly while sneering at my documents. Because of her, I had worked overtime and desperately put this together, yet this was her attitude. It was truly unbelievable. As I furrowed my brow, the bootlicker, Marshall, sided with Elizabeth. "She's always causing trouble. Maybe she should start over from elementary school? Even my kid could write a report like this." With those words, Elizabeth tossed the pages of the report one by one into the air. No, more like kindergarten. But I guess it's too late for that. Marshall looked me up and down, laughing in a condescending manner. I don't want to work with these kinds of people anymore. I thought about quitting right then and there. I quit. Your feelings have been made perfectly clear. Huh? You coward. Do as you please. The moment I bowed my head and left the office, the faces of all the employees turned pale. Especially my colleagues who had been watching me, their faces were visibly ashen. The one who had been doing Elizabeth and Marshall's work all this time was me. And I was the only one being harassed by the two of them. If I were gone, they were probably worried about the impact on themselves. As soon as I left the company, several of my colleagues chased after me. "Please don't go, Mrs. Sanders." My colleagues tried to stop me, out of breath. I turned around and replied, "Why? I already said I'm quitting. Are you trying to stop me because it might affect you guys who are left behind?" Perhaps I hit the mark, as my colleagues' faces turned red. My colleagues were only looking out for themselves. I couldn't help but think they were truly self-centered. I laughed with a sigh and said, "Sorry, but I can't put up with those two anymore." "Well, good luck starting tomorrow." With just that, I ignored my colleagues who had their heads down and left. I won't put up with this anymore. I'm sure starting tomorrow, everyone will have a tough time. Naturally, Elizabeth and Marshall will struggle more. After all, I had been doing their work for them all this time. I'll make Elizabeth and Marshall regret this for sure. And with that, I made a phone call to a certain person. "What's going on? Have you gotten used to the new director?" The person I called was Mrs. Henderson. She is currently the branch manager of a new office. I told Mrs. Henderson everything about Elizabeth and Marshall up to this point. I had no idea such terrible things were happening. Even Mrs. Henderson was stunned to hear about Elizabeth and the others' unbelievable behavior. "Mrs. Henderson helped me so much, so I'm disappointed it turned out this way." Mrs. Henderson had been a huge help to me and had given me so much guidance to learn from. Even though she had carefully nurtured me, I felt apologetic. But Mrs. Henderson said with a laugh, "This is your decision, Mrs. Sanders. I won't oppose it. And I think you did well to persevere in that situation for so long." Mrs. Henderson. I was moved to tears by her words. I felt guilty about impulsively quitting the company due to Elizabeth's and the others' attitudes. However, hearing Mrs. Henderson say that made me feel that my judgment wasn't wrong. "Besides, it seems like Mrs. Sanders will end up coming back anyway," Mrs. Henderson muttered. "What?" When I asked for clarification, Mrs. Henderson laughed, ha ha ha, and said, "It's nothing." "Well then, I'll be in touch." And with that, she hung up the phone. I'm not sure what she meant, but I was relieved that I was able to properly bid farewell to Mrs. Henderson about my resignation. That's what I thought with relief. However, the situation took a major turn the next day. The following day, my mobile phone rang. The caller was a colleague. Even though they had rejected me like that yesterday. Calling so soon, do my colleagues have no pride? I answered the phone, half amazed. "What is it, right on the heels of yesterday?" "I'm not coming back to the company." When I picked up, my colleague shouted in a pained voice, "Please come to the office right away. We're getting non-stop calls from clients you were in charge of. The handover documents are in the company's shared folder. And there shouldn't be any filings for my clients anytime soon, right? There's no work I was saving up either, so I don't think there should be any issues." I replied curtly to my colleague. I always kept the handover documents updated. I had prepared them because I thought anything could happen with Elizabeth and the others' attitudes. Then my colleague spoke in a troubled manner. "That's not all. Actually, Mrs. Alexander and Mr. Carter are pushing their work onto us, too. So, the other members are also swamped." Apparently, after I quit, my former clients frequently called. However, Elizabeth and Marshall refused to cover them. Even though they're the director and assistant, it's a blatant dereliction of duty. Not only that, but they're even pushing their own work onto others. They are clearly unfit as superiors. "So, what kind of inquiries are coming in?" I reluctantly asked about the content of the inquiries from the clients I used to be in charge of. The content was mostly tax law questions that could be answered even without being their representative. Half amazed, I conveyed the responses to the clients, and my colleague's tone changed. You are truly amazing after all. I think it would have been difficult for me to arrive at those answers. Won't you please come back to the company, even now? We really need you here, Mrs. Sanders. My colleagues seemed to have changed their opinion of me. However, even if my colleague's attitude changed now, I had no intention of returning. I'm sorry. I have no intention of coming back. I politely declined and hung up the phone. But after that, my colleagues kept calling incessantly. There was no end to it. There were so many that I just told them, if there's anything, please contact me all at once by email. I'll properly respond then. I didn't want to inconvenience my clients as much as possible, so I intended to do my best to assist them. Perhaps because I said that, the calls suddenly stopped completely. There were a lot of emails, but that couldn't be helped. As I was calmly checking my emails, another call came in. I had told my colleagues to use email, so who could it be? Looking at the caller ID, it was an unknown number. Even if I ignored it, they kept calling over and over. I was unsure, but I thought it might be some urgent contact. Determined, I decided to answer the phone. Hello? Hey, Mrs. Sanders, what's the meaning of this? Not coming to the office. The caller was Elizabeth. Though surprised by Elizabeth's call, I calmly replied, I clearly told you I'm quitting, right? And I have sent my resignation letter to your email address afterwards. Our workplace digitizes everything, and resignation letters are to be sent to supervisors electronically. Then Elizabeth shouted in a hysterical voice, Shut up! Just come to the office right now. Otherwise, I won't accept your resignation. Elizabeth said that and hung up. No choice. Guess I'll go to the office. There was a possibility that Elizabeth would arbitrarily crush the resignation letter I had sent. I should properly convey my intention to resign to the HR department. With no other choice, I headed to Abrupt CPA firm. Excuse me. I sighed as I showed up at the office. Immediately, my colleagues came running. Mrs. Sanders, I knew you'd come back. There are some things I need you to take care of right away. My colleagues called out to me happily. Another colleague looked like they were about to cry and said, It's about the tax returns from Mrs. Alexander's clients, but they haven't been touched at all. Please, won't you help? As I was surrounded by my colleagues, Elizabeth and Marshall appeared in front of me. Finally showed up at the office? You're late, so there will be a penalty. You always cause trouble for those around you no matter what you do. Elizabeth said that with a big sigh. Marshall's attitude was also quite imposing. Get back to work quickly. And there's work I want to give to you. And Marshall gestured with his chin for me to go to my desk. The moment I showed up at the office, this was their attitude. They probably hadn't reflected on their actions at all. I thought I needed to properly convey my thoughts. I'm not returning to the corporate tax division 2 anymore. What do you mean? Elizabeth was taken aback by my firm denial. What do you mean you're not coming back? Do you understand what you're saying? Marshall was also dumbfounded. I told the two of them with a resolute attitude. Mrs. Alexander and Mr. Carter, you two have always pushed your own work onto me, right? And then you slack off and leave at the usual time. That's not all. You've always nitpicked at my work, haven't you? Elizabeth laughed frivolously and said, Subordinates exist to support their superior's work, don't they? And it's only natural for a superior to point out if something isn't perfect. Or are you trying to talk back to me, your superior? And she maintained her high-handed attitude. Marshall also readily agreed, as if it were obvious. Support. It's already beyond the scope of support. From bookkeeping for your clients to proposals and tax returns. Pushing everything onto me is too much. In the first place, what work do you even do for your clients? When I asked, getting a bit emotional, Elizabeth and Marshall were at a loss for words. And after a long silence, they looked away and said, "I at least visit clients." Marshall also just looked down, feeling awkward. As I thought, Elizabeth and the others didn't do any behind-the-scenes work at all. I stared at Elizabeth intently. That's just for appearances, right? I make the materials and you use them to explain to clients. You make me research and answer all the questions you receive from clients. My colleague stirred at my words. Mrs. Sanders even handles inquiries? So Mrs. Alexander and the others really just show their faces to clients. Mrs. Sanders is truly amazing. A colleague muttered. But their voice was too loud, I could hear it clearly. Elizabeth and Marshall seemed unable to refute my colleague's mutterings. They were looking down with red faces. At that moment, that's enough. Surprisingly, Mrs. Henderson appeared. Mrs. Henderson? Why are you here? I was surprised by Mrs. Henderson's presence. Because she is now the branch manager of a new office. She doesn't have the free time to casually show up at the main office. As I looked puzzled, Mrs. Henderson answered with a guilty look. The branch is nearby. I got a call from another employee and rushed over in a hurry. Mrs. Henderson shrugged her shoulders. Mrs. Henderson. Thank you. She must have rushed over out of concern for me. Thinking that, I felt like I was about to cry. As I thought, my only ally was Mrs. Henderson. I felt that again. By the way, Mrs. Alexander. And you too, Mr. Carter. What's the meaning of pushing all the work onto your subordinate? Can you explain? Yelp! At Mrs. Henderson's glare, Elizabeth let out a strange voice, clearly terrified. There was no trace of her usual high-handed attitude towards me. That's... Elizabeth's face turned pale at Mrs. Henderson's appearance. And for good reason. Mrs. Henderson's position is higher than Elizabeth's. Plus, before becoming the director of the Corporate Tax Division 2, Mrs. Henderson was the director of the Corporate Tax Division 1. In other words, she's Elizabeth's former boss. So for Elizabeth, Mrs. Henderson is probably someone she can't defy. As proof, Elizabeth is shrinking back now. Seeing Elizabeth like that, Mrs. Henderson sighed and spoke. I heard everything from Mrs. Sanders. You pushed various things onto her because she's excellent. And yet, you nitpicked at every little thing, didn't you? Moreover, you're currently having an affair with Mr. Carter, right? Even though you're married, what do you think about that? What? I was surprised by the sudden revelation. Certainly, Elizabeth and Marshall are always together. But Elizabeth is married. So I never thought she had that kind of relationship with Marshall. Seeing my surprise, Mrs. Henderson spoke with a wry smile. Actually, there were rumors about these two since the Corporate Tax Division 1 days. They're both adults, so I had been turning a blind eye until now. But now that it's come to this, they'll have to face the appropriate punishment. They've caused a lot of trouble to you after all. Hearing about punishment, Elizabeth became agitated. What do you mean by punishment? Her voice trembled slightly. Marshall's face also turned pale. I was on the fast track to being an elite. What's going to happen to me? He muttered in a low voice. Marshall was probably dating Elizabeth out of calculation. Judging from Marshall's attitude towards young female colleagues, he actually seemed to prefer younger women. But he must have chosen Elizabeth for the sake of his own success. Though it all seems to have been for nothing. Mrs. Henderson told the two of them.
If it were just an affair, I could have sent you each to a regional department and that would be the end of it. But this time, it's dereliction of duty and pushing all the work onto your subordinate, right? I wonder how the managing director will judge this.
Maybe, worst, you'll be fired. Mrs. Henderson spoke as if enjoying herself, laughing.
Fired? You're joking, right? That would be a real problem. I'll work hard from now on. Just please, anything but being fired.
Elizabeth started trembling upon hearing about being fired.
That's right. I'll break up with Mrs. Alexander, too. Please spare me from being fired.
Marshall clung to Mrs. Henderson. His face already looked like he was about to cry. Elizabeth and Marshall each desperately pleaded not to face a heavy punishment. However, Mrs. Henderson only gave vague responses.
I don't know. I'm not the one involved. Why don't you go directly to the managing director instead of me? The managing director is a cold-hearted person, right? They'll definitely cut us loose without hesitation. What should I do?
Elizabeth muttered, staring at one point with a troubled face. In the midst of that, Elizabeth's eyes met mine.
Ah. That's it.
Elizabeth approached me with a sickeningly sweet smile. And she started trying to persuade me.
That's right. You say something too, Mrs. Sanders. Like, I want to work under Mrs. Alexander. I'll even withdraw my resignation. Right?
Please. She pleaded with me, her eyes full of expectation. Marshall also approached me.
Exactly. Prove that I've been doing my job properly. I'll even be with you if it comes down to it. So please convince the managing director.
Marshall said, clinging on to me. Marshall's attitude of casually hinting at a romantic relationship made me shudder. It was simply gross. Mrs. Henderson also showed her discomfort.
They're both quite desperate.
However, I was determined to make these two thoroughly suffer in hell.
Absolutely not. I'll tell the managing director everything that's happened until now. You two better be prepared. No way! Please have mercy.
When I said that, Elizabeth and the others dropped their shoulders powerlessly. After that, Elizabeth and Marshall were fired from Abrupt CPA firm. I heard that this time, there were complaints to the representative not only from me but also from my colleagues. And apparently there were also complaints from clients. Elizabeth and Marshall had been pushing accounting and tax filing work onto me. Even when clients had questions, the two of them couldn't answer because they didn't understand the contents of the accounting. So I ended up having to research and provide answers. That's why it took time to respond, and clients were starting to feel suspicious. The managing director took the situation seriously, including that, which seems to have led to their dismissal. And according to rumors I heard, Elizabeth and her husband divorced. It seems her husband will also get custody of their children. Elizabeth's husband found out about her affair with Marshall due to this dismissal incident and was furious, demanding a divorce. I heard Elizabeth is currently being sued by her husband for compensation in the divorce. Of course, the same goes for her affair partner, Marshall. Both of them lost their income after being fired from the company. In that state, they are burdened with debt in the name of compensation. The professional world is small, and there are lateral connections in the industry. The reasons why Elizabeth and the others ended up resigning may also be circulating to some extent through rumors. So finding a new job will be exceedingly difficult. Elizabeth and Marshall are sure to struggle from now on. I think it serves them right.
Since then, I returned to work at Abrupt CPA firm. Good work. I look forward to working with you starting today. We've been waiting for you. Mrs. Henderson greeted me with a smile. Actually, I ended up being transferred to the branch where Mrs. Henderson works. My former colleagues seem to want me to come back to the corporate tax division too, but I have no intention of returning to that place anymore. I'm sure my colleagues are now swamped with handling the clients Elizabeth and Marshall were in charge of and having a tough time. But I think it can't be helped. And since the branch is close by, I can continue to be in charge of the clients I was responsible for. That was appealing to me. Fortunately, my clients accepted my transfer without any issues. I think there will surely be various difficulties ahead. But even if I get discouraged, I want to stand up again no matter how many times it takes. In this branch, I have a boss I can respect. Mrs. Sanders. Come over here for a sec.
Yes. I'll be right there.
I will do my very best under Mrs. Henderson, so that I can shine even brighter.
Grandma, you're too old and stuffy. Stay away from me.
When my granddaughter Vanessa got home from school, she went straight to her room and suddenly started throwing things and hitting the walls. Vanessa, why are you so angry? Did something bad happen at school? I peeked into her room, worried, and she tried to throw an alarm clock at me. Ever since losing her parents, Vanessa had shut us out emotionally and stopped smiling.
Ugh, shut up. Shut up. Shut up.
Screaming, Vanessa pushed past me and Martin, her grandfather, who were blocking the doorway, and ran out of the house. 3 days after she ran away, we spotted Vanessa walking around the mall with her friends. We could never replace Vanessa's parents, but I hoped we could connect with her a little more. I felt like if I let this chance slip away, I'd never be able to face Vanessa again. As I swallowed hard and tried to approach her, that's when it happened.
My grandma is the best in the world. I'm so proud to call her my grandma.
What? Knowing Vanessa's heart, tears welled up in my eyes. My name is Cynthia, and I'm 55 years old. I work part-time at a local seafood processing company and live with my husband Martin, a civil servant. Our son Timothy had already moved out and started his own family.
Timothy and his family are coming back for Christmas this year.
When I told Martin, his eyes lit up. Really? That's something to look forward to. I can't wait to see Vanessa. Vanessa is Timothy's child and our only grandchild. Every year, the highlight for us was having Timothy, his wife Sandra, and Vanessa visit for Christmas and New Year's. And that year, they came to our house for Christmas as usual.
Grandma, hello.
As soon as she got out of the car, 7-year-old Vanessa ran up and hugged me with all her might. You've grown so much since the last time I saw you.
Grandma, let's play tons.
As Vanessa tried to run into the house.
Vanessa, no running inside.
Sandra quickly scolded her. Vanessa came back looking a little apologetic. Okay. She answered as her mom had told her and walked into the house without running.
Grandma, let's play cards.
Even after being scolded by Sandra, Vanessa quickly shifted gears and regained her usual smile. Sandra was usually a mild-mannered person, but she was strict about discipline. When the three of us, me, Vanessa, and Sandra, went shopping at the supermarket.
Grandma, I want a donut.
Vanessa tugged on my hands in front of a donut stand. No. If you eat a donut now, you'll be too full to eat dinner, right? Sandra objected, furrowing her brow.
Ah, you're so stingy. A little is fine. She's right. A little bit won't hurt, will it?
When I thoughtlessly indulged Vanessa. Please don't spoil her like that. Sandra spoke to me sternly, like a teacher scolding an elementary school student, and walked into the supermarket.
Oops, we got in trouble.
I stuck out my tongue and laughed.
Yep, we got scolded.
And Vanessa laughed too. The next morning.
Get up. How long are you going to sleep?
Sandra's angry voice echoed through the house.
No, just 5 more minutes.
I couldn't help but chuckle at the sound of Vanessa's grumbling.
Timothy used to be like that too.
Martin also laughed, reminiscing about Timothy's childhood.
Get up, Vanessa. Brenda is here.
Brenda is a girl the same age as Vanessa who lives next door to us. Whenever Vanessa came to our house, she always played with her.
Vanessa, let's go play.
Vanessa finally got out of bed when her friend invited her. Vanessa and Brenda were such good friends that they decided to have dinner together that night. When Sandra cooked and served the steak.
Vanessa, this steak is delicious.
Right? My mom's cooking is the best in the world. Vanessa proudly puffed out her chest as if she had cooked it herself. The fun times with Vanessa flew by, and we reached the morning of the third day. Do you really have to go home? I wanted to play more with Brenda and Grandma and Grandpa. Vanessa started crying, sad to leave us.
Don't be selfish. Dad has work tomorrow, so we have to go home today.
No. I'm going to live at Grandma and Grandpa's house forever. Vanessa clung to my waist and refused to get in the car. Sandra sighed.
You're troubling Grandma by saying that. When we get back, you can play with your friends there too. Hey, how about we have gratin for dinner tonight? Let's do that.
Sandra managed to persuade Vanessa and get her into the car. Bye-bye then, Brenda. Bye-bye Grandma and Grandpa.
We'll see each other again.
I encouraged her and saw off Vanessa, who was crying and waving. About 2 hours after Timothy and his family left, I got a call from Martin at work and had a bad feeling. What's wrong? Did something happen?
Well, I just got a call.
Martin seemed at a loss for how to respond, but eventually made up his mind and conveyed the facts.
Timothy and his family were involved in an accident.
As Martin's explanation unfolded, I felt like time had stopped and I couldn't think of anything. He said that the car Timothy and his family were in had been involved in an accident while driving on the highway. I was so shocked that my body stiffened and I couldn't move.
Pull yourself together.
But a scolding voice snapped me back to my senses. When we rushed to the hospital where Timothy and his family had been taken, it was overflowing with other patients brought in from the same accident. Grandma, Grandpa.
Vanessa, you're okay. Does it hurt anywhere? Oh, thank goodness.
I hugged Vanessa tightly as she ran up to me crying.
Mom and Dad are.
Vanessa sobbed, choking out the words. I felt like I had been hit hard on the head and was about to faint. Martin, who was next to me, hurriedly supported my body. According to the attending physician, Timothy, who was driving, and Sandra, who was in the passenger seat, had suffered severe damage and were already beyond help by the time they arrived at the hospital. Only Vanessa, who was in the back seat, had escaped with just a few scrapes.
It's my fault. It's because I selfishly said I wanted to stay at Grandma and Grandpa's house forever.
I hugged Vanessa tightly again as she cried and blamed herself. That's not true at all. You're not to blame at all, Vanessa. So please don't be so hard on yourself. As I gazed at Timothy and Sandra's lifeless bodies, I exchanged a look with Martin. Though we didn't say it out loud, Martin's eyes told me.
We'll protect Vanessa.
Sandra, Timothy. It's so frustrating. But don't worry. From now on, we'll raise Vanessa right. Please always watch over her. We vowed to raise Vanessa in Timothy and Sandra's place. After that, time flew by in a blur as we were caught up in the funeral, with no time to dwell on our sadness.
Vanessa, wanna go hang out?
Even when Brenda came to visit, Vanessa stayed cooped up in her room and refused to step outside. Come on, Vanessa. Brenda came all this way, so why don't you at least show your face? Even when I gently called out to her, Vanessa kept her head down and sat motionless in the corner of the room. I'm sorry, Brenda. Could you come back tomorrow?
Okay. Well then, see you tomorrow, Vanessa. Bye-bye.
With those words, Brenda came to check on Vanessa nearly every day. Where had the always bright and smiling Vanessa gone? Ever since losing Timothy and Sandra, Vanessa had become a child who never smiled. Still, people have to move forward. I proceeded with the paperwork to transfer Vanessa to a new school. Starting from the new semester, Vanessa would attend the same elementary school as Brenda. Vanessa, why don't you try going to school soon?
I won't go. I don't want to go.
Saying that, Vanessa immediately distanced herself from me.
Vanessa, let's go to school together.
Brenda came with her mom to pick up Vanessa. In the room, I somehow managed to get Vanessa to carry her bag. Vanessa, don't stay down in the dumps forever like that. Try smiling once in a while. Even when I purposely made a weird face, Vanessa averted her gaze and didn't laugh. Putting me aside, make sure to cherish your friends, okay? They came all this way to pick you up, after all.
Cheer up, Vanessa.
Brenda came into the room, and Vanessa finally stood up. Little by little is fine. If only Vanessa could get her smile back. With that wish, I saw Vanessa off as she headed to school. After that, a year passed in the blink of an eye, and Vanessa turned 8. Vanessa goes to school properly every day now.
Welcome back. Was school fun?
I always greeted Vanessa with a smile. Vanessa doesn't respond and immediately shuts herself in her room.
Vanessa, if you have a free moment, could you help Grandma out?
The weeds in the garden had grown out, so I invited Vanessa thinking some physical activity might lift her mood a bit.
It's tiring and I'll get sweaty, so no thanks. You do it by yourself, Grandma. Never mind the weeding then. Well, could you help me prepare dinner? There's a TV show I want to watch, so you do that too, Grandma.
No matter what I said, Vanessa avoided contact with me like that. On days when I made my specialty dishes for dinner,
your cooking isn't cute at all and it's not delicious either.
Vanessa refused to even touch my cooking and only ate bread. On open school day, when I took time off from my part-time job to go to the school.
Everyone else has their mom or dad, but I'm the only one with Grandma. Everyone will laugh at me, so don't come next time.
Vanessa gave me a disgusted look. Another day, when the hem of Vanessa's shirt was fraying, I bought her a new shirt from the local general store, but...
What's this? It's so lame. I can't wear something this embarrassing.
She threw it on the floor without wearing it even once. She must be going through a rebellious phase. Don't let it get to you. Martin consoled me with a wry smile, but I don't think that's all it is. I had a feeling that deep down in Vanessa's heart, she might be harboring worries and pain that we adults couldn't notice. I racked my brain trying to think of ways to get Vanessa to open up to me even a little.
Hey, Vanessa. Is there anything you want to eat? Grandma will make your favorite foods for you. Then make roast beef. That was one of Mom's specialties.
I wonder if I can. I've never made that before.
What about aqua pazza then? Mom's was delicious. I bet you can't make it anyway, right?
Vanessa purposely named dishes I wasn't familiar with.
Leave it to Grandma. I'll make a roast beef so delicious it'll surprise your mom in heaven.
Brimming with baseless confidence, I jotted down the names of the dishes Vanessa requested in a memo before I forgot them, then ran to the nearby bookstore with the memo in hand.
Done. It at least looks like roast beef, I think.
I made the roast beef following the instructions in the cookbook, and somehow managed to get it into a proper shape despite my inexperience. That night, we invited Brenda from next door to eat the roast beef I had made.
How is it? It's my first time making it, but did I manage to make it tasty?
This is delicious. You're a genius. The first to praise me wasn't Vanessa, but Brenda.
Thank you, Brenda. What do you think, Vanessa? Whatever. I still preferred the roast beef Mom made. So it was no good after all, huh? Okay, aqua pazza was next, right? I'll make that next, so look forward to it.
I smiled wryly, but steeled myself for the next goal. Wanting to see Vanessa's smile again, I respected her wishes not only in cooking, but in choosing clothes as well.
Vanessa, today you get to pick out clothes you like yourself. Grandma will buy you whatever you want.
To avoid repeating my previous failure, this time I asked Brenda's mom to recommend a clothing store she frequents, and took Vanessa there.
That looks great on you, super cute.
Even when I praised Vanessa as she tried on a floral dress. I guess I'll get this one then. She just sulked and muttered. Vanessa's elementary school holds a cultural festival every autumn. Vanessa and her classmates were busy preparing for their cultural festival performance. When I got home after finishing my part-time job, the atmosphere in the house felt different than usual. Martin, who had gotten home before me, was sitting in silence with a slightly troubled expression. What's wrong, honey?
Well, I don't really understand it myself.
The sounds of hitting walls and throwing objects could be heard repeatedly from Vanessa's room.
She's been like this the whole time. Even when I ask her the reason, she just says it's nothing. I have no idea what happened.
This time, I called out to Vanessa in Martin's place. Vanessa, why are you so angry? Did something bad happen at school?
Go away, Grandma. You're too old and stuffy, so don't come near me.
Saying that, Vanessa tried to throw an alarm clock at me. But she stopped herself at the last second and threw a teddy bear that was lying at her feet instead.
That's enough. If you won't even tell us the reason, Grandpa and Grandma don't know what to do. I already told you it has nothing to do with Grandpa and Grandma.
If you keep being spoiled like that, your dad and mom in heaven will be sad, you know? Martin tried to appease her.
Ugh, shut up. Shut up. Shut up.
Screaming, Vanessa pushed past me and Martin, who were blocking the doorway, and ran out of the house. Hey Vanessa, where are you going? As I hurried to chase after her, Martin grabbed my arm to stop me.
I know where she went.
With a smile, Martin said that. That night, we got a call from Brenda's mom.
We'll keep her here tonight, okay?
I'm so sorry for the trouble.
No, it's no trouble at all. Brenda's happy to have her too.
After hanging up, Martin gently rubbed my back. Time will sort things out eventually, Martin said encouragingly as I kept sighing. 2 days passed and Vanessa still didn't come home. All I could do was bring a change of clothes for her to Brenda's house next door. Brenda's mom said with a smile,
"Leave it to me."
But we couldn't keep relying on them forever. We had to face Vanessa head on. Martin seemed to understand this too, but unable to find a good solution, he just sighed every time he came home from work. At times like this, if only Timothy and Sandra were here. Why did they have to pass before us? Saying that, Martin gazed sadly at Timothy and Sandra's portraits. On the 3rd day after Vanessa ran away from home, I spotted Vanessa and Brenda while walking through the mall after finishing my part-time job. The two were walking far ahead of me and hadn't noticed my presence. I wanted to call out to Vanessa. If I could face Vanessa and talk things out, I'd feel so much better. But even though I thought that, when I actually tried to approach her, my feelings hit the brakes and my feet froze. While I hesitated, the two went into a bookstore. I considered just passing by the store without saying anything, but my feet stopped in front of it. No, this was my chance to talk to her. Before I could sort out my feelings, I stepped into the bookstore. Being typical elementary school kids, the two headed for the manga section. As I held my breath and looked for a chance to talk to Vanessa. Sorry, Brenda. I kind of want to look at some cookbooks. Vanessa suddenly stopped and turned around, so I hurriedly hid behind a nearby bookshelf.
Vanessa, you want to cook?
Yeah. I want to try making the roast beef Grandma made the other day myself. In front of the cookbook section, Vanessa was cheerfully chatting with the big smile she hasn't shown us lately. Maybe Vanessa didn't like the roast beef I made after all, and thought she could do better making it herself. I found my thoughts turning negative like that. Ugh. Just remembering it puts me in a bad mood. Vanessa was still angry at us. My chest tightened painfully.
The roast beef your grandma made was really delicious,
Brenda said, remembering the taste of my roast beef. It really was. But the aquapazza was even more delicious. I think the food Grandma makes is the best in the world. The moment I heard that line, I thought, what? Doubting my own ears.
I'm jealous. I wanted to try the aquapazza too.
Sure. Next time Grandma makes aquapazza, you can join us, Brenda. Vanessa started to say, but suddenly fell silent. Vanessa, why aren't you going home? Your grandma is worried about you, you know?
Yeah, I know that. I feel bad about worrying Grandma and Grandpa. But I got in a fight with Grandma, and I still don't want to go home yet. You actually love your grandma, don't you?
I love her so much. Grandma is my favorite person in the whole world, Vanessa declared loudly, her voice echoing in the quiet store. But I can't tell Grandma I love her. I feel like I shouldn't say it.
Huh? Why? That's weird. If you love her, you should just say so.
If I get too attached to Grandma, if I say I love her, if I start thinking of Grandma like my mom in heaven will feel lonely.
I don't think that's true. And you were so cool the other day, Vanessa.
Brenda gently patted Vanessa's back to comfort her.
Even when the boys laughed at you for not having your mom and dad, you told them straight out,
I have my grandma. I was so frustrated then. I don't have my mom or dad anymore, but grandma and grandpa are always there for me. I couldn't stand them making fun of grandma. From their conversation, I finally understood why Vanessa had been acting out. Apparently, while preparing for the cultural festival in class, some boys had laughed at Vanessa because it would be her grandparents coming to see it this year instead of her parents. Ever since open school day, the boys had started teasing Vanessa about me. Ugh, I'm getting irritated again. Those jerks. Vanessa wasn't angry at us, but at those boys. Her feelings for her mom and her sense of inferiority about only having grandparents were intricately intertwined. Vanessa, still young, must have been struggling, unable to sort out her own emotions. Careful not to be noticed by Vanessa and Brenda, I dashed out of the bookstore and hurried home. When I got home, Martin had already returned from work. Why are you crying? Seeing me, Martin was surprised to notice something was off. I'm not crying. I just got something in my eye. I tried to brush it off, but then shook my head. Honey, I just found out. I told Martin about Vanessa's true feelings that I had overheard at the bookstore. I see. So Vanessa was suppressing her own feelings after all. Martin understood the situation. We may have been holding back with Vanessa all this time. That might be true. We had made our peace with the fact that Timothy and Sandra had their own parenting approach and that outsiders shouldn't meddle. But those two are gone now. We're Vanessa's parents now. We're all Vanessa has. We don't need to hold back anymore with Timothy, Sandra, or Vanessa. Exactly. Why didn't we realize something so obvious? Isn't it our responsibility to accept and watch over all of Vanessa, the good and the bad? Martin and I gazed into each other's eyes and nodded firmly. All right, now that we've decided, we'll be busy tonight. We need to prepare to welcome Vanessa back. You're right. I need to polish my cooking skills, learning from my previous failure. Martin and I headed to the supermarket in the car he was driving. Do we have enough ingredients? We're not forgetting anything, are we? Let's see. We got the meat, the onions. I think that's everything? Oh dear, we're out of olive oil. I have to buy some. Let's get some potatoes too. The dish will look better with potatoes. Martin, who usually doesn't get involved with housework, was unusually proactive in helping with the shopping this time. After getting the cooking preparations in order, we waited outside the house and saw Vanessa coming home with Brenda. When Vanessa noticed me, she said, Brenda, let's go. I can stay over again tonight, right? Deliberately ignoring my presence. Wait, Vanessa. No more sleepovers. Starting tonight, you have to sleep at home. Understood? I said in a slightly firm tone. Vanessa looked at me. Huh? Surprised for a moment. But Vanessa still tried to go with Brenda. I'm sorry, Vanessa. Your grandma said so too, so I can't let you stay over starting tonight. Bye-bye. See you tomorrow. With that, Brenda ran back to her own house. Hey, wait. Brenda. Having lost her place to stay, Vanessa glared at me with a slightly troubled look. Don't make that face. Come on, go take a shower. Let's have dinner after you finish your homework, okay? Vanessa sulked but reluctantly followed me. At dinner time, Vanessa came out of her room looking somewhat tense. Did you finish your homework? All right, I'll warm up the soup. Unusually, Martin also helped set out plates and bring over dishes. I've been rereading cookbooks and tried making roast beef again. How is it? Has my cooking improved? Give it a taste. Vanessa silently put a slice of roast beef in her mouth. How is it? Have Grandma's cooking skills gotten better? Nothing special, it's okay, I guess. Vanessa's reaction was lukewarm, but her cheeks relaxed and a faint smile seemed to escape from the corners of her eyes. It's written all over your face that it's delicious. Come on, admit it honestly. When I teased her, Vanessa said, Shut up, don't look at me, and averted her gaze with a small laugh. Even though you're resisting with your words and attitude, you're actually happy, right? I smiled and looked away. I stroked Vanessa's head. Huh? What are you talking about? You're annoying. Vanessa continued to push me away. I heard everything you and Brenda were talking about at the bookstore. When I said that, Vanessa's ears turned red.
What? Eavesdropping is the worst.
Vanessa resisted, but I hugged her tightly anyway. As if giving up her resistance, Vanessa silently accepted my embrace.
Your mom always wished for your happiness and nothing else, right? Sure, she could be strict at times, but she was many times kinder and thought of you before anyone else in the world. A mom like that wouldn't feel sad about you relying on me. On the contrary, wouldn't it be more painful for her to see you suppressing your feelings or pretending to act out like earlier?
No. It's because I said I wanted to live at Grandma's house that Mom and Dad ended up like that. Maybe it's my fault for being a bad child that I can't see Mom anymore.
That's not true. That's not it at all. Your mom is still watching over you even now. I'm sure it would make her happy to see you smiling brightly every day.
Before I knew it, Vanessa's arms were clinging tightly to me. Grandma, Grandpa, stay with me forever. Vanessa pleaded with me, her voice trembling with tears.
We will. Grandpa and I will always be by your side. You're not alone, Vanessa.
Vanessa turned her tear-stained face toward me. I was so lonely after Mom and Dad were gone. I love you and Grandpa so much. I really wanted to rely on you. But I thought if I got too attached, Mom in heaven would be sad. Thinking that, I couldn't let myself depend on you.
You're such a kind girl, Vanessa.
As I stroked Vanessa's head, I glanced to the side and saw Martin, who had been listening silently, also sobbing. From that day on, Martin and I stopped simply spoiling Vanessa.
Come on, Vanessa. It's morning. How long are you going to sleep? Hurry and get up to eat breakfast.
Let me sleep a little longer, just 5 more minutes. Just 5 minutes is fine.
No. Brenda will be here soon. Now, get up and go wash your face.
Don't say things like Mom used to. Vanessa grumbled but got out of bed and headed to the bathroom.
Vanessa, eat your carrots too.
Martin, for his part, noticed the carrots Vanessa had pushed to the edge of her plate and scolded her.
What? No way. I hate carrots. These carrots are exceptional. Grandma's seasoning is exquisite.
Saying that, Martin stuffed the carrots in his mouth with relish.
Come on, Vanessa, they're delicious, so try some.
When I encouraged her with a smile, Vanessa made a face and ate the carrots.
How is it? Yummy? Not really. It's normal.
Even as she said that, Vanessa's expression seemed to be smiling somehow.
Vanessa.
Brenda's voice could be heard from the front door. Just a minute. Realizing the time, Vanessa hurriedly started getting ready. Geez. If Grandma had woken me up earlier.
I did wake you. You just wouldn't get up. Now, both of you.
In any case, we had become able to say whatever we felt to each other without holding back.
Grandma, let's make Chinese food together after the cultural festival.
Okay, let's do that. Grandpa and I will definitely go see your cultural festival too.
I'm off then.
Saying that, Vanessa ran out full of energy.
Sandra, Timothy. Watch over Vanessa as she grows.
Timothy and Sandra's portraits seemed to smile gently at us as if watching over us. Your dad got transferred, so we're all moving to New York. Take care, you good-for-nothing daughter. From Mom. The note left on the living room table was filled with cruel words. It seems I have been left behind in this house. But there's always hope. Thanks to Grandpa, I was going to achieve great success. My name is Marion. I'm a 34-year-old constantly at the mercy of my 3-year-old daughter. Even after playing to her heart's content at lunchtime, she's always full of energy, running around naked every time she gets out of the shower. I spend my days chasing after this little princess. It's great that she's so lively, but my mid-30s body is deteriorating day by day, so please go easy on me, sweetie. Now I'm completely at the mercy of my child, but when I was little, I was at the mercy of the adults every day. I don't remember exactly when, but when I was small, a relative said this to me. Could this child have autism? At the time, I didn't really understand what that meant. But I remember my parents going pale and looking crestfallen, saying, "Maybe." Back then, it seemed my existence was a source of worry for my parents. Because compared to my brother Anthony, who was 3 years older, my development was slow. I was late to start talking, and even when I did start, I didn't speak properly. I was unassertive and shy around strangers. In response to this, people around me started saying things like, "Girls usually develop faster, don't they? My daughter, who's the same age as her, is already picky about what clothes she wears every day." Or, maybe her slow development is because of poor parenting. I was born in a very rural area. My parents were classmates in high school. They returned to their hometown right after getting married, so there are a lot of their old classmates living in our neighborhood. I bet when they were young, they all fueled each other's competitive spirits through sports and academics. And then those young people also got married and had children, and now it was a parenting competition. They tried to one-up each other in every way, like whose baby started crawling at how many months, or whose child learned to read and write the alphabet early. I think it's an ugly fight to compete based on a child's rate of development, but that's just my opinion. My parents were no exception and joined this battle as soon as Anthony was born. Unlike me, my brother Anthony developed quickly. From a young age, he could look at a calendar and add or multiply adjacent numbers. With just little instruction, he became good at math, a smart kid. The people around us praised Anthony to the skies for his unchildlike excellence. To be honest, my parents were terrible at studying, and the neighbors who knew this made a big fuss about how an outstanding child was born to an average couple. My parents were very proud. Then I was born, and the reputation of my parents, who had been a couple with a brilliant son, plummeted. While their son was exceptionally talented, as if by a sudden mutation, their daughter was not. People started saying that the daughter must take after her parents, who were bad at studying and could only do sports when they were students. If people around us hadn't said unnecessary things, my parents might not have been so concerned about my slow development. But whether they meant well or not, people started lecturing my parents on parenting methods. They gave all sorts of advice that was meant to be helpful but was actually just meddling, like telling them to feed fish to a slow-developing child, or saying maybe they didn't talk to me enough. Honestly, a lot of the opinions and suggestions were off the mark. But my parents took their words at face value and made me eat fish, or drink strange supplements that were supposedly good for growth. It's not like doing those things would suddenly make me start speaking articulately or being able to do math. That's just common sense. But my parents started lamenting. Why is this child's development so slow when we're doing so much? Then came that comment from a relative. Could she have autism? My parents became completely convinced that she must, and even though they never took me to a doctor, they decided I was an autistic child. From then on, my parents treated me harshly. When I had just started first grade, this happened. "Starting today, you're going to do this." Huh? Mom suddenly shoved a huge stack of workbooks at me. Apparently, they were Anthony's, who was studying ahead and using 5th grade material under the guise of previewing. My parents seemed to think that no matter how bad my natural intelligence was, if they crammed studies down my throat, I could at least become a normal child. By forcing me to study, it seemed they were trying to raise me to be at least an average child, or maybe slightly above average. There's no way a child at the age when they just want to play could sit at a desk for boring studying. Of course I resisted, and was constantly leaving my desk without listening to my parents. But that behavior apparently made me seem even more autistic. My parents decided my actions were symptoms of autism, saying things like, "Kids like this just can't sit still after all," or, "This is what happens when you can't communicate with people." Meanwhile, at Dad's urging, Anthony took an online IQ test and got an astonishing score of 150. Although, it was just some online test. It wasn't a big deal. But my parents proudly declared, "This child really is amazing." And so, the narrative in our house became the genius Anthony and his autistic little sister, and all of my parents' expectations and affection were poured onto Anthony. Anthony was good at sports like our parents, and was one of the star players on his elementary school soccer team. But it was a small soccer team with only kids from our rural area, so being a star player rather than the actual ace didn't really mean much in the grand scheme of things. He also did fine in his studies across the board, but, thinking about it now, I don't think he was really a genius with an IQ of 150 like they said. But once my parents got carried away, they couldn't see those little details. Instead, they both went around calling Anthony a prodigy and bragging about him. The neighbors who initially praised him along with them started keeping their distance. My parents praised Anthony so excessively that even I became convinced he was an amazing person. You know how kids see whatever adults say as absolute truth. On the other hand, Grandpa on Dad's side was calmly observing the situation. Grandpa lived nearby, but we almost never saw him face to face. At most, it was probably once or twice a year. Why, you ask? The reason is simple. Mom hated Grandpa. This was a little before I was labeled as autistic. At a family gathering, while Mom left me, young at that time, alone and went on and on bragging about Anthony over drinks, Grandpa admonished her, saying, "Stop excessively praising the boy, or he'll struggle because of it when he's older. Focus on taking care of Marion too." In fact, Anthony was overpraised and coddled by everyone around him, and it was starting to cause issues with his personality. He would say things looking down on other kids, and sometimes even make comments ridiculing adults. Once he told an older cousin, "That's why you can't get married," freezing the air. By the way, that cousin had just had her engagement called off after her fiancé's cheating came to light. He didn't seem to have any sense of cherishing me as his little sister either. He would call me weird nicknames and trip me when our parents weren't looking. That's what Anthony was like, unpleasant as he was, and our parents just kept calling him a prodigy without ever scolding him. They never said it to our faces, but I think to our relatives, our family was a real pain to deal with. That's exactly why Grandpa reprimanded Mom. I think he was totally right. But Mom didn't like what Grandpa said. She blew up at him, yelling, "Don't tell me how to raise my kids," and making a big scene arguing with him in front of everyone. Dad took Mom's side, and our relatives just watched, not wanting to get involved. The only one who sided with Grandpa was Grandma, who passed away. With that background, my parents became estranged from my grandparents, but Grandpa still cherished us, grandkids. Grandpa was the only one who noticed how mean Anthony was to me and scolded him for it. But it's not like he was annoyed with Anthony like the other relatives. I think he tried to love us equally as his grandchildren. When our relatives and parents suspected I might be autistic, I remember Grandpa saying, "Even if that's the case, what's the problem? She's still an adorable child." As for me, he was probably worried about my home life. Once he wrote down his home phone number on a note and gave it to me, saying, "If you ever feel sad, call me anytime." But I never called that number. Somehow, I felt like calling Grandpa was something I had to hide from my parents, and it made me feel guilty. If only I had relied on Grandpa sooner. I think about it now. Once I was labeled as autistic, my family's treatment of me got worse. Being forced to do workbooks was nothing compared to the rest. Anthony, who was as mean as ever with no hint of affection for me, would flip over my meals under the guise of pranks, throw only the foods he hated onto my plate, and steal my favorites off my plate. He didn't even care if our parents saw anymore. And of course he didn't, because even when they saw Anthony bullying me, instead of scolding him, our parents would just say,
"Ah, he's playing with his little sister,"
without care. Our parents never got angry at Anthony nor blamed him for anything. In fact, somehow I often ended up being the bad guy. If Anthony got a mere 80% on a test, they praised him to high heaven and bought him a new game console. For his birthday, they left me behind and celebrated at a fancy restaurant. I have no memory of ever being treated as more important than Anthony, whether I got good grades, it was my birthday, or I got sick. No matter what, our parents doted on Anthony, so he got spoiled by that environment and stopped studying. His test scores kept dropping, and he started skipping school more to play at home. But our parents just optimistically said,
"That boy's a genius, so as soon as he gets serious, he'll turn this situation around."
Meanwhile, I studied desperately to surpass Anthony and kept getting better grades than him, but the autistic label was never removed. In the first place, I don't think they were even interested in me anymore. Apparently, our parents originally wanted brothers. They were so disappointed when they found out I was a girl. But still, since Anthony was a prodigy, they thought maybe his sister would be a genius too, but that expectation was shattered. On top of that, Dad was apparently put in charge of a big project that his promotion depended on, so the atmosphere at home was really unpleasant. Dad would come home stressed, drink and complain, sometimes blaming Mom for trivial things as if to vent. And Mom would get fed up listening to his gripes and be irritated, but couldn't express that frustration to Dad. While Dad vented his stress on Mom, it's not like Mom will take out her stress on us, kids. Her target was always pointed solely at me. She extremely coddled Anthony, and enjoyed seeing my face filled with envy and sadness. It was a nasty way to relieve stress. Moreover, Dad started venting his own stress the same way, and Anthony must have noticed our parents' behavior. He escalated his bullying as if he could do anything to me and get away with it. And so, I ended up in a punching bag position in the family. Mom started frequently tampering with my meals. Anthony's plate would be piled high with foods both he and I liked. Meanwhile, my plate had nothing but foods I hated. Then she'd snicker and say,
"Eat up."
Dad would take textbooks out of my backpack to make me forget things. Even if I thoroughly checked I had everything before leaving, somehow every few days a textbook would be removed at some point. In the first place, a child's wits are no match for an adult's pranks. Mom and Anthony were probably in on it too. Needless to say, my frequent forgetfulness made my teachers suspect I was autistic, too. As for Anthony, his harassment was escalating beyond bullying, like shoving me into intersections when the light was red or jabbing me with an umbrella. After starting middle school, Anthony went to school even less and often trashed my room during the day. I'd often notice my favorite books from the bookshelf ripped up. I was 12 at the time. Anthony was getting stronger and had a short temper. I was too scared to even think about talking back to him. I had no choice but to endure in silence. And then finally, a certain incident occurred. One Saturday morning. I slept in a little, and when I went downstairs to the living room, there was a note on the table.
"Your dad got transferred, so we're all moving to New York.
Take care, you good-for-nothing daughter." From Mom.
"Sorry, but don't hold it against us." "Well, you're autistic, so maybe you won't even get what happened." From Dad.
Bet you're frustrated being left behind? Sucks to be you. The last one wasn't signed, but I knew it was Anthony. It seemed my whole family had abandoned me. My mind went blank. Can a child even survive alone? With no money, what am I going to do for food from now on? I'm sure you all think my thought process at the time was pretty carefree for a kid. But that's just how kids think. Even with parents like that, they still fulfilled their financial responsibilities as parents. I had no experience living apart from adults. With my parents gone, I didn't even know what I should prioritize. I think the fact that meals and money were the first things to come to mind stemmed from human survival instincts. Not knowing what to do, I desperately pondered various things as a child, but couldn't find any answers. Before I knew it, I was hugging my knees and crying in the middle of the living room. I didn't know if I was crying because it hurt to be abandoned, or because my future anxiety was so great. I couldn't even tell what I was crying about anymore. My heart was a mess. After crying for a while, a memory from when I was little suddenly came back to me. If you ever feel sad, call me anytime. The memo with Grandpa's phone number and his kind words. I had always felt guilty about my parents and was convinced I shouldn't rely on Grandpa, but now those parents were gone. Was it too late now? Recently, my parents stopped participating in family gatherings and even visiting for Christmas. So I hadn't seen Grandpa in years. He might hate me as a selfish grandchild who only reaches out when she's in trouble. I agonized over what to do, but couldn't think of any other adult to turn to. I hesitantly picked up the receiver and called Grandpa, clinging to it. Grandpa. I had been crying all day and couldn't hold back my tears even on the phone. My voice trembled from the first word. Then,
Marion? Are you crying? What's wrong?
Grandpa sounded flustered. Everyone moved away.
What? What do you mean?
Dad got transferred. My incoherent conversation probably made no sense. But Grandpa still listened to me slowly.
So Marion, everyone left you behind?
Yeah. They said I'm a good-for-nothing daughter because I'm autistic. I don't know what I'm going to do from now on.
Don't worry, leave it to Grandpa.
Grandpa.
Anyway, I'm coming over there, so wait for me.
Okay. Within 10 minutes of that exchange, Grandpa came to our house by car. He told me to stay at his house for the day, but when Grandpa contacted Dad and Mom to give them a piece of his mind, they said they didn't want to be involved with me anymore. Enraged by this, Grandpa declared he would take me in. From then on, I started living with Grandpa. 10 years passed.
Wow! What a lovely home! I wanted to show my gratitude to Grandpa who raised me. To think the young female CEO everyone's talking about lives in such a wonderful mansion. I'm so envious.
The one speaking cheerfully in front of me was a reporter I always saw on TV. Somehow, a TV crew had come to film the house where I lived with Grandpa. Why, you ask? Because I had become a bit of a celebrity. I was 22 at the time. My university had a program to support student startups, and when I tried starting a business with my friends, it was a huge success. A single brain training book became a massive hit, with events held not just in America, but worldwide, and games being released. The media featured me as the young female CEO who started a business in college. Eventually, they even came to my house saying they would take a peek into the female CEO's private life. By the way, after founding the company, I used the money I saved to buy a $10 million mansion way out in the countryside. Grandpa was supposed to be taking it easy after retirement with his pension and savings, but he went back to work to raise me. On top of that, he even put me through college. I'll say it as many times as it takes, but I'm not autistic. My parents just decided I was. As long as I put in the effort, I could keep up with everyone in my studies too, until elementary school, that is. Once I hit middle school, I was forced into sports by the school and had to do volunteer work, drastically reducing my study time. I quickly fell behind in class, and my grades were bad in most subjects on tests. I'm not good at sports either, so all I could do was try hard at studying. But once you fall behind, strange things happen. Even if I asked the teacher questions about the class, I had no clue what the explanations meant. It was the literal state of I don't even know what I don't understand. I started getting anxious, wondering if I really was autistic and had just been covering it up with effort until now. Grandpa noticed my struggle and helped me study. And he did it in quite unusual ways. Studying math concepts not in the textbooks, and foreign languages through movie subtitles. I read tons of books for English, and learned chemistry using everyday items for science. At first, I had doubts when Grandpa taught me methods and concepts totally different from what I heard in class, thinking, "Can I really learn this way?" But when I tried it, it made more sense and stuck in my head better than the lessons. And strangely, even though the approach was different, I properly arrived at the same answers as the methods taught in class. According to Grandpa,
Studying doesn't have to be limited to formulas and rule-based thinking. There are many ways to solve things, so pick one that clicks with you.
following that advice, I gained a flexible approach and was able to study well again, rapidly rising in the class rankings. And eventually, I was able to grow enough to advance to a prestigious university. I learned this later, but apparently Grandpa used to be a college professor. He said he left academia to take over the grocery store belonging to Grandma's family after they got married. But then, big grocery stores increased and they had to close down. He switched to being a businessman, a totally different field, which brings us to today. Dad hated studying and never retained what he was taught, but Grandpa told me teaching me was rewarding because I absorbed everything he taught so eagerly. Needless to say, those words of praise made me even more motivated to study. To me, Grandpa was like a superhero I admired. And to express my endless gratitude to Grandpa, I built this house. Actually, Grandpa has gotten old and uses a wheelchair these days. The house we lived in before had a lot of steps and made it hard for him to get in and out of bed. We relied on home care services during the day, but if the house was a bit easier to use, there were many things he wouldn't need help with. And the more Grandpa relied on others, the more I felt his body was weakening. Even with limited mobility, it's important to do some things for yourself. So I decided to build a completely barrier-free house. Luckily, land was plentiful out in the rural area. I had my pick of lots. I prepared a big yard for Grandpa, who loved going on walks, and built a small gym and pool so he could exercise even in a wheelchair. I was particularly picky about the bath and toilet, and had a low-height counter installed in the kitchen so Grandpa, whose hobby was cooking, could still cook while in his wheelchair. Well, after preparing this and that, it turned into a $10 million mansion, or rather, a bit of a leisure facility. The budget went way over, and what was supposed to be a cash purchase ended up being a loan, but if it helps Grandpa live longer, it's a small price to pay. When I talked about this on TV, a few days after the broadcast, my parents suddenly showed up at our house. I was planning to ignore them, but Grandpa said, "At least hear them out." It wasn't that he wanted me to be kind to my parents. He probably didn't want me, now in a leadership position as CEO, to act solely out of resentment. He told me to be a mature adult with some leeway, and I thought, he's right, so I decided to listen to my parents. "Why did you suddenly come to see me?" In response to my question, "We're sorry for everything until now. Please forgive us." My parents bowed their heads incoherently. Anthony, whom they supposedly doted on, was nowhere to be seen.
I don't hold a grudge anymore for the past, and I'm not interested either.
It's a bother to be apologized to now for things that are over. Then, will you help us? Dad looked at me with glistening eyes as he said that. I unintentionally let out a dumbfounded, Huh? Huh? Help you, with what? I thought they just came to apologize, but I guess not. Well, of course. It's these people we're talking about. As Dad fell silent, Mom started speaking awkwardly. Actually. Apparently, my parents had tried to send Anthony to a famous prep school after moving. But even after moving, Anthony rarely went to school, had bad grades and behavior, and even overslept on the day of an important test. He ended up enrolling in a high school said to be the worst in the state. My parents thought he could make up for it in college, but Anthony refused to go to college. In fact, by the time he started high school, he had become a complete truant and started rampaging at home. You see, Anthony himself had been called a prodigy by our parents and seemed to believe it too, but as he grew up, he realized he wasn't a genius after all. But my parents didn't notice and kept bragging to everyone about Anthony being a child prodigy even after moving. It was different from living in the countryside, where people would just keep their distance and leave it at that. Anthony stood out as that transfer student. His parents are kind of weird too, and seems to have been made a laughingstock. It's no wonder. In reality, Anthony wasn't a child prodigy, and even his talent for being good with numbers became average as he grew up. He was worse at studying than me, who was at least called autistic, and after his truancy increased, he got fat and wasn't great at sports either. And yet, if his parents excessively praise him as a genius, of course he'd be laughed at. And so Anthony went to school even less, developed a habit of skipping, and everything from his relationships to his studies fell apart. Eventually, he started rampaging to vent his stress. He overslept on an important test day and couldn't get into a top high school. He failed the second-round admissions too, and they made him go to night school, but he rarely attended and dropped out. After becoming an adult, he apparently started taking money from his parents' wallets without working properly and going out drinking. And the other day, Anthony got on his knees and apologized, saying he got a woman he met at a bar pregnant. This is developing too fast for me to keep up. So what? You want my help, basically to make me pay for the birth? As I looked on in astonishment, Dad held his head and said, No, that's not it. There's more to this story. There's still more. While internally amazed at how deep this mess was, I listened to the rest of the story.
Actually, the young lady who got pregnant is from a mafia family.
You mean she's the daughter of the mafia?
Seems so. Anthony was taken to their house by car, beaten, and came back.
So what? Are they talking about him taking responsibility and marrying her?
No, they're saying to break it off and just pay consolation money and child support. But from what I hear, it seems like a badger game on the lady's part.
Hearing that, I went and understood. In all likelihood, the young lady doesn't love Anthony or anything. I don't even know if the pregnancy story is true. In any case, he got involved with a troublesome person.
Please! We want you to help us out financially. It doesn't seem like not paying is an option. At this rate, we'll end up in the sea too.
Dad turned pale as he said that. I didn't need to hear the rest to know what would happen to them in the sea. I'm aware we treated you horribly. But the fact that we're your parents hasn't changed, right? You must have at least a little feeling that we're important to you. Please, remember that feeling. Forgive us for back then and help us. Mom pleaded, spouting words that were outrageously brazen and shamelessly impudent. Does she not realize that those lines sound like an apology but aren't actually apologizing? Nah, I'm a good-for-nothing daughter. I don't want to show my good-for-nothing side even more by getting involved with my precious dad and mom. Even though Grandpa told me not to act out of resentment, I ended up retorting out of a grudge over being called a good-for-nothing daughter. Well, I think I can be forgiven for this much. There's no way you're good for nothing when you can build such a big house. You're our precious daughter, Marion. Saying that, Dad tried to grasp my hand. I swatted his hand away and said, "Well, of course. Parents who come to their daughter for money are way more good for nothing." Grandpa didn't seem to be scolding my attitude either. If anything, he seemed to be saying, "You tell M." He, too, appeared to be outraged at my all-too-selfish parents. Dad awkwardly lowered his eyes, and Mom showed an angry attitude, saying, "You said we didn't have to apologize, but you're not forgiving us at all. What do you want?" "What do I want?" you say. If I said I wanted an apology, would you apologize? Of course. If I wanted money, you'd give me money? Huh? I can take that to mean you'll do whatever I want, right? You feel that you're deeply sorry, right? That's why you came all the way here to apologize, right? Mom fell silent at my questions. Geez. I can see right through your scheme to apologize on the surface and cleverly get money from me. You're really shameless people. You've got some nerve saying that when you never intended to forgive us in the first place. Oh, I think if you sincerely apologized, I might consider helping you. What? Because you're my precious parents. When I smiled and said that, my parents looked at each other and nodded. We're truly sorry. Marion! I'm sorry. What are you sorry for? F for calling you a disgrace. You? Marion. Is calling me a disgrace the only thing you're sorry for? No, there are other things too. Like what? We were always mean to you, even though you have autism. Autism? Me, who went to college unlike Anthony. Did I get diagnosed at a hospital? Or are you doctors? We just decided it ourselves. That's right. And what do you mean by being mean, specifically? Making you eat only things you hate. Didn't you say that was a coincidence? So it was deliberate meanness after all, huh? We're sorry. I mean, you don't feel bad about moving and leaving me behind? Oh, of course we feel bad about that. Yeah, I get it. Okay, go home then. What? After going back and forth with me, my parents looked at me with dumbfounded expressions when I told them to go home. Didn't you hear me? Go home. About face, march straight to the front door. Aren't you going to help us? I thought about it, just like I said I would. Huh? I only thought about it. That should be enough. Instead of ignoring you and turning you away like normal, I took the time to listen to you. Be grateful. You tricked us. How rude. I never said I'd help you. I only thought I might consider it. I hadn't even decided if I would think about it, but I properly considered it because you apologized. I don't want to hear this and that from people like you who tried to deceive me by insisting your meanness was coincidental. My parents were stunned and couldn't argue back against my words. Taking advantage of that, I forcibly made them stand up and kicked them out the front door. Good luck struggling through life with your failed prodigy, Anthony. Goodbye. Wait. I slammed the front door shut. Thanks to the long hallway, I couldn't hear my parents' voices once I got away from the entrance. But their shadows were there for a long time, so they were probably calling for me at the door. But that's none of my business. And then I got word that Anthony had been arrested for assault. According to the victim, Anthony punched and kicked them, but, For some reason, Anthony was the one who took damage. Moreover, the so-called victim seems to be connected to the mafia. For a moment, I wondered if he had been set up by that young lady's family, but the truth remains unclear. My parents were threatened by the lady's family, and through their connections, ended up having to borrow money from a loan shark. They took out a huge loan and apparently paid that money to the family as consolation, but they couldn't pay back the debt. Not only that, but the amount ballooned for various reasons, and now they're in debt hell. It seems there was talk of divorce between my parents, but since getting divorced wouldn't allow them to escape from the debt or the lady's family, they apparently chose to stay together. If you're going to be cornered by evil, having two people is probably more reassuring than being alone. Since I'm technically family, I hired a lawyer early on to protect myself from getting caught up in it somehow, so I avoided any issues. Anthony and my parents will probably be exploited for life. I pray nothing happens to me. Meanwhile, I continued to successfully expand my business, and currently have an events company in addition to my original one. There's high demand from overseas, and it looks like there's still plenty of room for growth. And, a few years ago, I married a half-Japanese, half-British man I met through work. Now, I happily live with my cute daughter with big eyes, my husband, and grandpa. Oh, right. One more happy thing to report. Looks like building a mansion was the right call after all. For a while, Grandpa was able to walk a tiny bit on his own. Now he's even older than before, so he can't walk anymore, but I feel like he's gotten younger compared to before, maybe because he has more chances to exercise. At the very least, Grandpa was more lively in both conversation and movement than a man I met at work recently who's the same age as him. It was an expensive purchase, but I'm glad I bought the mansion thinking it would be good for Grandpa. Live long and watching over us going forward. Grandpa.